Welcome everyone to Bizarre Prehistory, the Explainer. Look, I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're going to completely shatter those Hollywood-fueled dinosaur stereotypes you probably grew up with. You know the ones? Those basic green lizards just kind of dragging their tails in a swamp? Yeah, forget all of that. We're looking at the actual fossil record today to uncover the most bizarre, extreme, and just utterly fascinating evolutionary paths these animals really took.
Okay, let's dive into this, because we have to start with the most iconic dinosaur trait of the whole shebang, that screen-shaking, terrifying roar of the T-Rex. If you close your eyes, I bet you can hear it ringing in your ears right now. But here's the billion-dollar question. Did the T-Rex actually roar?
Well, the truth is way more fascinating. Those legendary roars from the movies, they were literally just created in a sound studio by mashing up elephant bellows, crocodile growls, and, I kid you not, the sound producer's own dog barking. The scientific reality is quite different. Paleontologists looking at the anatomical structure of dinosaurs and their closest living relatives tell us that open-mouth, lion-style roars were highly unlikely. Instead, these massive creatures likely produced low-pitched, swooshing sounds, or maybe deep, booming noises, kind of like a modern ostrich.
They relied on something known as closed-mouth vocalizations. So imagine this. They would inflate these fleshy pouches in their throats or windpipes while keeping their mouths completely shut. This created eerie, low-frequency rumbles that you would literally feel vibrating in your chest more than you'd actually hear them with your ears. Oh, and by the way, that famous velociraptor resonating chamber, the one that acts like a prehistoric duck call in the movies, yeah, that is a complete myth. Real dinosaurs simply didn't have that kind of anatomical hardware.
Section 1. The Ultimate Dental Plan.
Let's transition rapidly into some physical oddities and look at the most bizarre mouth to ever exist on Earth. Meet Nigersaurus. This was a plant-eating sauropod from West Africa, affectionately called the Mesozoic lawnmower by paleontologists. And you can definitely see why. It had this incredibly lightweight skull, so full of large openings that it was almost translucent if you held it up to the sun. Plus, it held its neck completely horizontally, just sweeping its absolutely bizarre, perfectly straight-edged, vacuum cleaner-shaped jaw back and forth across the ground vegetation. Now what's really interesting here is the number 500. Inside that straight-edged jaw, this peaceful grazer packed over 500 tiny, flat teeth. They were arranged in these continuous, tightly packed columns. And because Nigersaurus was constantly grinding down on tough, low-growing vegetation all day long, those teeth wore out incredibly fast. So evolution gave it a brilliant solution: a brand new smile every 14 days. It continuously grew new teeth right behind the old ones, replacing the entire front line roughly every 2 weeks just to maintain absolute peak grazing efficiency. It's an unparalleled extreme of dental engineering.
Section 2. Scythes, domes, and tiny arms.
Let's move into a rapid-fire museum tour of the Cretaceous period's most unexpected anatomy. 3. This number represents the length, in feet, of the scythe-like claws wielded by our next dinosaur, the Nigersaurus. That is nearly a meter long, for a single claw. Literally the longest claws of any animal in the entire history of the Earth.
You'd absolutely expect an animal carrying 3-foot size to be some kind of apex nightmare predator, right? Well, in a massive twist of evolutionary irony, the Nigersaurus was actually a pot-bellied, gentle plant eater. Despite walking around with the most terrifying weapons imaginable, this giant mostly just used them like enormous garden hooks to pull down high branches or, perhaps just to show off to rivals.
And the fossil record is just packed with these oddballs. Take Dinosaurus, for instance. For decades, scientists only had its massive 8-foot-long arms and assumed it was this horrifying killer. When they finally found the rest of it, turns out it was a giant, humpbacked omnivore with a face like a duck. Or consider Carnotaurus, a fast-running meat-eater that sported 2 blunt bull horns right above its eyes.
And speaking of Carnotaurus, if you thought the T-Rex was famous for having embarrassingly small arms, Carnotaurus absolutely takes the prize here. Its arms were almost comically tiny. We are talking totally useless limbs with no functional wrists and zero elbow mobility. Basically, they were just tiny little nubbins stuck onto a massive, muscular predator.
Let's move to and see how this builds when we look at their defenses. Meet Pachycephalosaurus. Its name literally translates to thick-headed lizard, and it took prehistoric headbanging to a level we have never seen before or since. This thing rocked a solid bone-skulled dome that was up to 10 inches thick.
For years, scientists debated what in the world a 10-inch block of bone was actually used for. But the fossils tell a pretty violent story.
Some specimens show healed impact injuries right on the dome itself. So much like modern bighorn sheep, these domes were heavily armored battering rams. Males would literally headbutt each other in high-speed collisions to compete for mates and territory.
Section 3. 4 wings and iridescent feathers. Now we pivot to one of the most fascinating transitional chapters in the fossil record, where the evolutionary link between dinosaurs and modern birds gets kind of blurry. This is Microraptor, a tiny predator right about the size of a modern crow. But what makes it so spectacular is that it possessed functional flight feathers not just on its arms, but on its legs as well. Essentially, it was a 4-winged dinosaur. While it couldn't sustain powered, flapping flight like an eagle, it used this 4-wing setup to glide highly effectively between trees, hunting small fish and lizards in the ancient forests of China.
And get this, we don't just know its shape, we actually know its color. Thanks to incredibly well-preserved fossilized melanosomes, those are the tiny structures that give feathers their pigment, scientists proved that Microraptor was covered in glossy, iridescent, black feathers. It would have looked very much like a modern raven, shimmering in the Cretaceous sun as it glided through the canopy.
Section 4. Weird was built to survive.
So we've looked at vacuum jaws, giant scythes, useless arms, solid bone domes, and 4-winged gliders. It's super easy to just laugh at how strange they look, right? But so the crucial point is that these traits were absolutely not mistakes. They weren't evolutionary failures. Quite the opposite, actually. These extreme adaptations were masterpieces of survival. These highly specialized tools are exactly what allowed dinosaurs to completely dominate this planet for over 160 million years. To put that into perspective, that is about 64 times longer than humans have even existed.
And this brilliantly illustrates our core takeaway today. To our modern eyes, a jaw with 500 continuously replacing teeth looks like an alien monster. But to the Nigersaurus, it meant perfectly efficient grazing for 10 million years. A 10-inch bone dome looks utterly ridiculous until you realize it allowed Pachycelosaurus to resolve extreme physical conflicts without suffering lethal internal wounds. Nature doesn't build weird just to be weird, you know? It builds weird to win.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating thought to wrap up this explainer. If we got so much wrong about dinosaurs for so long, from their roars to their posture to their feathers, what will researchers millions of years in the future get completely wrong about the animals alive today? Imagine trying to reconstruct an elephant's trunk from just its skull, or a peacock's beautiful tail from just its leg bones. It's like a giant puzzle. The fossil record is incredible, and every new piece we find just proves that nature is far more creative and far more bizarre than anything we could ever invent in Hollywood. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into prehistoric weirdness, and keep questioning everything you think you know.